I think if you look to the program, you'll know we've got a couple of other guests joining us as we start to look at this issue and perhaps take apart some of the things that Joyce has told us. Hopefully take apart any of the fears that you have around this issue and really begin to understand what a disability access officer can look like. So to help us do that, can we please welcome Alun Francis, who is the disability access officer at Arsenal FC. Give Alan a big welcome, please. And also I'm going to call upon Ruth Hopkins from Level Playing Field, which is the UK-based national cafe, if you like, where cafe has come from. Please, a round of applause to Ruth.
Hi, Ruth. Yeah.
Let me just ask, how many of you know about the Disability Access Officer scheme before this morning? How many of you are aware that it's going to happen and some of the reach that it might have? Patrick Gasser puts his hands up, of course. Anybody else? I think we've got about, 30% of the audience know what the scheme is about. Okay, so hopefully we can delve a little bit deeper into that. Alan, can I start with you? Just a couple of questions. And as I ask these questions, please have your own questions to mind. We've got about 40 minutes, I think. As somebody who's performing this role at Arsenal, what is your daily job? What do you do on a day-to-day level? Who do you liaise with? Where do you sit in the club?
I'm part of the club's administration team, or my administration department. I also have two colleagues who assist me full-time. We are the Disability Liaison team of Arsenal Football Club, and we provide all the services for disabled supporters and visitors to Emirates Stadium. We do that 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and also on a match day, we provide a match day service as well. I've been there for over 10 years, and Arsenal is a very supportive club of disabled supporters inclusion. I think it's a very forward-thinking club, which is why I've been there 10 years already, and other clubs are along that pathway now.
So you have a team of three of you.
Three altogether.
And when, say for example, and then next week I think you're playing Bayern Munich in the Champions League. How will you talk to the disability access officer at Bayern or the DLO?
I'm in contact with Bayern through their box office about the tickets that we have for our disabled supporters. We have 6 wheelchair users going over there to Bayern next week, and about 8 non-wheelchair users who've all got tickets through my team. We liaise on about what gates, how our supporters can get there, where they can park, how they get into the stadium, and obviously with their enablers as well. So we talk to the team that we are playing as much as possible.
Okay. And Ruth, you've been around, particularly in England and Wales, the clubs, probably every club, advising them as an access consultant on some of the things they need to do. Why will a disability access officer really make a difference to those clubs?
I think when there's a disability access officer, we have a point of contact and somebody who is championing the cause for disabled people. It's really important that there is someone at the club that can have that topic at the top of the agenda. So for us at Level Playing Field, it makes it a much easier process to have that named person that we can contact. And they will liaise with other members of the club for us on our behalf, or introduce us to the right people to be speaking to regarding various topics.
And maybe Joyce can help here as well. What is from your point of view, Ruth, what does a job description of a disability access officer look like? If you were to say, what are the top 5 things that you'd be looking for them to be doing on a day-to-day basis, what would they be?
They would need to have a good understanding of the legislation, the equality legislation. They would be committed to the cause. I think that's really important. As Joyce mentioned earlier, it's really important that we have somebody who has a good understanding of disability and not just wheelchair users, a pan-disability understanding. Somebody who is familiar with, they don't have to know all the legislation, but they have to have this good understanding, and they need to know some of the basic building requirements for making, but also to know their limitations and when to call in the experts to advise them as an access auditor.
Yeah, I would add they really need to be good at persuasion. That's really important. And I think they need also to either have a network of contacts locally or be prepared to build a network of local disability NGOs. So a really practical example, if somebody requests the programme in Braille or in audio file, that they know where to get that service provided quickly by experts that already do it. They're not reinventing the wheel, they're working the networking. They're also encouraging, what I often hear as I go around Europe is, there's no point us doing this because no disabled fans come. And you know, I politely then point out, and sometimes perhaps not as polite as I should be, well, look, quite frankly, I wouldn't come because the experience here at the moment is unacceptable. But if you change it, we can help you to bring disabled fans here. And these are often clubs that have lots of empty seats, but there's no facilities for disabled people, and you have disabled people desperate to come and enjoy football, but they can't, or they don't know the information. So they're really, I guess the top 5 would be, I'm not sure if it's 5, motivation and persuasion skills, a really good knowledge, and if they don't have it, that willingness to learn. We all constantly learn. This is a fast evolving subject. New technologies, developments are changing all the time, so they've got to be prepared to learn, and they've got to have a good basic understanding of, you know, what are the barriers, what are the things that need fixing.
I think this issue of the difference between a supporter liaison officer, which is already in operation, there's already a European scheme that Supporters Direct run to encourage supporter liaison officers. Clubs in Germany, for example, they're well established. You wanted to make a big difference, or a clear difference, between the SLOs and the disability access officers. Alan, maybe you could describe at Arsenal the difference between your role and the SLO.
My role at Arsenal is purely focused on disabled supporters and visitors coming to the stadium and making sure that the club complies with disability legislation in the UK. The supporter liaison officer, he works with all the supporters clubs in the UK and abroad, the Arsenal supporters club in the UK and abroad. So there's a clear definition in our roles.
The SLO scheme works quite well, though. What if there are clubs who, as you the example you gave, who are a small club, under-resourced, want to put the role under the one person for both roles?
There's no reason why they don't do that, but what we would say is absolutely that person has to have an understanding of this topic too. You cannot give this topic to someone that doesn't have the knowledge, because with the best intentions, they will do more harm very often. And sadly, you know, we have seen a few clubs in the UK where actually they've made redundant the disability liaison officers, as they've been called to date, to make way for the supporter liaison, and made that a joint role. And what we know by bitter experience, if somebody isn't dedicated and experienced in this field, it slips down the agenda because it is a bit harder to achieve. And I'm not, you know, there's no ill intent in saying that, but it's a hard fact.
Do we have any questions from the floor at this stage? I know there are colleagues here from Germany who have their experience in terms of disability liaison officers to share with us. If there's anybody, I know there are colleagues from Supporters Direct who may want to comment on the SLO, DAO comparison or difference. In the meantime, Joyce, this is a criteria. This is in the UEFA regulations. What potentially happens to a club who might want to play in the Europa League or the Champions League if they don't appoint a disability access officer, or indeed you're not happy with the work that they're doing generally around disability access?
At this stage, it's a should criterion. So what we mean by that, a club is not going to lose its license if it doesn't have a disability access officer this season or next or whatever. And we have an understanding, you know, for those of us that are in countries where this is a topic that's more developed, we have to appreciate there's a long catch-up for some countries to do, and we have to give them time to catch up. So depending on the country, depending on the club, depending on its resources, I think there will be some judgment made. But UEFA has made it clear that ultimately, and we've seen this across other equality sectors, and in fact on this very topic, UEFA is never shies away from taking the responsibility if there would need to be a sanction because a club hasn't fulfilled this criterion. At some point that will happen. But you please bear with us. We need to do this in a tolerant, inclusive way, and it will be an organic process. And I think maybe in 3 years we have this discussion. I really hope we have a lot of disability access officers where there aren't at the moment. And at that point, perhaps we will need to look at toughening things up if we haven't.
And what if somebody wants to become a disability access officer at their club? They have the best intentions, but don't have the knowledge at the moment. How should they go about perhaps making the case at the club for the need for that officer, for the resources associated and so on? Ruth?
I think, as we've said, the legislation is there, it's coming in now, the requirement. So I think that's a good point, a good starting point for someone who goes to the board or to their club and champions for the role. I think it's a way to upskill, certainly from the disability liaison officer's role, because there are going to be more requirements within this within the role, more specialised requirements, because won't just be looking at supporters and spectators; it will be across employment as well. Can you help me with them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point is we don't want to say if somebody is really keen to do this topic, that means they have the passion. And there are certainly enough of us around and out there and locally where there are training courses, CAFE can help, we will be running workshops. So we don't expect everybody is going to come in as an expert. I think at the larger clubs we would expect somebody, because they're going to come into a job with a lot of responsibility, that they have that expertise to a certain level. But as Ruth says, to upskill, and if you've got the passion, you can learn the rest. What we don't want to see is, just as a matter of course, the ticket manager or somebody else at the club is given this role to the expression tick a box. This has to be a real job, a real responsibility with real duties in the club.
And what sort of things will CAFE do to help support those access officers? I mean, you'll have this new person coming in to work with you. Sounds like an attractive job. Actually, I might apply. But what sort of things will you be doing? Do you know already?
Yeah, our task is to work with the national associations, because it's their responsibility to implement this criterion as a member of UEFA. So very much CAFE does not want to step on any toes. It's aware that, you know, there is a lot of local resource. So CAFE will work with the national associations. We'll develop a toolkit, training programs that can be used and translated and can come and provide workshops. And if that national association is happy, the CAFE will also be more than happy to have a dialogue directly with clubs. That's something that's happened anyway over the last 6 years. There are clubs here today, we already have relationships with some clubs and talk to some clubs on a regular basis. We also want to work where there are national disabled supporter groups and include them in this so that they can play a role too. So it's about that whole network. But if anybody has a question, I mean, for goodness sake, pick the phone up, I'll speak to you, but somebody will help you and speak to you. But the idea is we'll have somebody dedicated to the topic, but first platform is to work with the national associations.
This is a very shy audience. I haven't seen any hands go up just yet. If you do want to contribute, then I've got one just there. Madeleine. Yes, you do.
For the
they
translators,
should be coming to you.
Just at the front.
Introduce yourself, please, Madeleine.
Hi, my name is Madeleine Noresh from FIFA. I have a question on a global level. What does the picture look like in terms of the disability access officer at clubs around the world? North America, South America, is this something that exists already? And is there an openness as well from other confederations to follow UEFA's lead in this regard? Maybe to Joyce.
I'm so pleased you asked that question, Madeleine, because it's right on the top of my list the next time we meet to discuss this. So I couldn't be more pleased you've asked that question. It will greatly help us if FIFA can do something similar, and I know that the structures are slightly different. And, you know, I know we say it a lot, but it's true. The relationship we have with UEFA, the work we do together, I see it every day. It changes individuals' lives. Believe you me, of course it's about a game of football or it's about a job, but it's about so much more. You know, talk to so many of my friends in this room, disabled people. A lot of you know my story. 2 years I didn't leave the house. It was a game of football that gave me my life back. It's that important. So yes, if we can have a discussion, because we need to motivate the other confederations to replicate the work that we're doing. We already have some partners that networks we're building around the world. It's slow progress, but this topic, you know, we've had contact from India, all over the place. They have the same issues, if not worse, than we experience in Europe. So there's much work to do. So yeah, we'll put a date in the diary, definitely. So.
The other question I had, actually, before we come to the floor, is this balance between being someone who is technical, who knows the legislation, knows some building regulations, and knows the fans, and someone who has the power to persuade, because sometimes these can be very different skills. Just a little comment on that, because I almost feel that some people sitting out there will be thinking, well, how are we possibly going to get somebody who has all of those skills? That's it's quite a big job, right?
Well, you can certainly learn the technical requirements. I learned, I had a career change, and I learned all the technical skills, and I haven't looked back really. It's been, it's opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know about. So I think the most important thing, as we've said several times, is the passion and the commitment to get things right.
Thank you. So we've got a question just in the middle, the back there.
Okay. Yeah, it's not a question, Piara. I understood your comment a few minutes ago as an invitation to speak. My name is Stuart Dykes. I work for Supporters Direct Europe. And it's my job to oversee the implementation of Article 35 of UEFA's club licensing regulations, which is the supporter liaison officer role, which has been mentioned several times already. I think Joyce has said everything that needs to be said on the need for these roles to be separate, for the SLO role and the DAO role to be separate. They're separate skills and different tasks. And you can be sure that in our work, when we're working with the national associations, that we will be making that point quite clearly, so that clubs are not tempted to combine the two, especially the clubs in the smaller countries or the smaller clubs with few resources. That they shouldn't yield to that temptation to combine the role, unless. As Joyce also said, it is possible to combine the two, but I think the DAA role has to take then precedent. It's vital that the person is qualified to be the DAO. That person can also be the SLO, and I know of some clubs in Europe where that is indeed the case, especially in Germany. One club particularly springs to mind, but it has to be the DAO role first, and then the SLO coming second, rather than the other way around. And I just think one point that I've learned in the last 5 years that I've been involved in this job, rolling out the SLO role across Europe, is we tend to focus on one person when we talk about the support liaison officer or when we talk about the disability access officer. And I think it's really important, especially for those smaller clubs who will be tempted to combine the two, that we need to talk more in terms of a team rather than one person. Yeah, because especially with the smaller clubs, the people who are involved in doing the tasks of SLO and DO will tend to be volunteers. They won't be employees of the club. They'll be working maybe just for expenses. And these are people who have full-time jobs maybe, who won't be able to go to every game, or won't always have time to dedicate to the role as they would like. So it's important to build a team so that where you've got one person who maybe can't do the job on a particular day or in a particular week, that there are always people there to stand in or to be able to carry on the work. And I see some of the bigger clubs in Germany where there are some crossover between the two roles. So to even have a bigger team, which includes the support liaison workers and the DAO workers as well, and Werder Bremen in Germany springs to mind. They have a team of 10 people, of which one is a DAO, and then there's an assistant DAO as well, and they're all working together in one team, so they're all there for each other. So I think that's just an important point to to remember when you're rolling out. And Joyce, whenever, let's sit down together and see how we can cooperate and work together. And as you say, especially on cost cutting, because it's sometimes difficult to persuade the national associations to invest the necessary amount of money. But I think if we work together closely, we'll be able to move things forward.
Stuart, before we move on to the next question, just to ask you something specific. You just alluded there that some associations, it is difficult to persuade them to get involved. What's your experience generally? I mean, I was pleased actually that Poland, the Polish FA, have got involved very quickly. They've already appointed somebody to lead on this. As a parallel scheme with the SLOs, what's your experience generally in terms of the different cultural changes that we need to bring about?
Well, it varies widely. You mentioned Poland. That's also one of my best practice countries on the SLO side. So there's definitely a commitment there. I think, as Joyce said, it's a job of persuasion. We have to. It's my job as well to persuade national associations and to get them to persuade their clubs that they need an SLO. Not just that they need an SLO, but they understand why an SLO is good for them, that they understand the advantages, that it's not just supporters coming in saying, oh, this is a nice thing, this is what we would like. There are actual tangible benefits to be had for the clubs, and it's our job to persuade them, to make sure that they understand and to educate them, if you like, that this is the case. And obviously, in some countries, you get straight away. They're right there right from the beginning, and we can work very well with them. And then there are others where they are reluctant for various reasons, mainly financial, it has to be said. But obviously, on my side, there are other issues relating to security and crowd disorder problems, which have to be overcome, which, that's why the two roles are so different, because we're facing totally different issues in some instances. But there will be the temptation for financial reasons in the smaller countries to try and cut corners, and because it does need an investment, and money is tight. So it's a job, as Joyce has said, persuasion right up there. Right, we've got to be good salespeople to sell. As I say, there are tangible advantages and benefits to the clubs, and that's what they need to understand, and that's our role.
Thank you, Stuart. I think we had another question here. There's another two to the left. Just here in this first block. No. Just there.
Bonjour à tout le monde, je me présente. Je suis Monsieur Poutet, président de l'Andy Fan Club OM, l'association. Je suis administrateur du comité national de football des supporters et je suis depuis 24 heures donc président de la Fédération française de supporters de football handicapés. Voilà. Alors j'ai une question pour Joyce. Est-ce que en France il y a déjà des personnes qui sont des DAO? C'est ma première chose. La deuxième chose, j'ai écouté un petit peu le système du DAO et je peux vous dire que nous, et puis je vais parler sincèrement, nous à Marseille, nous pratiquons pratiquement ce que vous venez de dire, c'est-à-dire qu'on s'occupe des handicapés depuis le début, on s'occupe de leur trouver, disons, leurs billets, leur place, de savoir comment il faut venir au stade et puis de les placer réellement là où il faut. C'est pas tout le monde qui fait ça. Je pense qu'on est pratiquement en Europe les seuls à le faire. J'ai une question qui m'a brûlé un petit peu les lèvres. Est-ce que le DAO doit s'occuper aussi de voir quand nous faisons des déplacements, c'est-à-dire que pas que des déplacements en France, mais des déplacements à l'étranger? Est-ce que le DAO est habilité à aller voir, disons, le stade où l'on va voir le match, de savoir exactement s'il y a des places pour nous, comment on peut faire le trajet, tout ça. Et ça, c'est vraiment quelque chose de très important. Je ne sais pas, mais monsieur ne m'a pas expliqué s'il faisait ce travail-là. Parce que ça, c'est très important pour nous, les personnes handicapées. De plus, vous devez vous rendre compte quand même que il n'y a pas que nous en France, mais c'est de partout pareil. Quand nous faisons des déplacements, selon où nous sommes en Europe, nous faisons les déplacements, disons, ou en avion, ou en train, ou en véhicule adapté, plus ou moins. Et vous savez très bien que malheureusement, les personnes handicapées dans les avions, on prend à 4 personnes, et la plupart du temps, nous sommes traités enfin un petit peu mieux que des animaux, mais légèrement mieux. Est-ce que tout cela implique, disons, la personne, la DAO, qui, disons, d'après la directrice, devrait s'occuper des personnes handicapées. Voilà, c'est les questions qui sont précises et qui nous aideront à faire de l'avant. De plus, je poserai une question aussi. Est-ce que vous êtes habilité à envoyer, disons, dans les clubs français ou européens, d'avoir, disons, une personne qui va être le DAO dans tous les clubs professionnels, en France ou ailleurs, hein, je ne sais pas, mais parce qu'à l'heure d'aujourd'hui, on nous a dit qu'ils avaient reçu, mais vous savez, en France, avant que ça bouge, c'est un petit peu... tous ces clubs, ce sont des administratifs. Alors avant que ça arrive, je pense qu'il y a des gros soucis. Mais nous, on ne se plaint pas trop à Marseille parce que je pense qu'on fait déjà un travail, disons, allez, 50%, même 60% d'un DAO. Voilà, je vous remercie de me répondre. Je vous souhaite une bonne journée à tous.
So we have a quite technical question from our colleague from the National Disabled Supporters Organisation in France, which is specifically about access into a stadium for the DAO, and then also a general point about the French situation.
I obviously know René and the team at Marseille very well, and it's a difficult topic, and I think you might not agree with everything I'm going to say, and I respect the work you do, but I think we have to be very clear. This role has to be a role that is about the club. The club has to employ this person. This person has a responsibility for and to the club as the first priority. And when we take those roles with the very best intentions as volunteers from the outside in, we can sometimes do jobs that the clubs should be doing for them. And maybe sometimes we do that job better than they do, or we think we do. But while we do that, we hold the system back, because the club has to learn to integrate this topic across every aspect of what it does. Of course, disabled fans on match days, but that's not the only bit of this story. So it is absolutely vital that the person is a member of the workforce of the club. Of course, they must have a really good relationship with disabled fans and their groups. We have to move away from the situation which I think, if I'm honest, some clubs have used because it's been an easy option for them, where disabled fans groups are effectively managing the tickets, managing all the match day. Because your job, my job, is to challenge the club. And if you're doing a job of service for the club, that becomes a very uncomfortable relationship at some point, because you will be compromised. And I don't want to name clubs here today, it wouldn't be fair, but I know clubs where this has backfired on them spectacularly. It hasn't helped the club, and it hasn't helped disabled fans. Now, I know you have a really active, amazing bunch of fans, and you are dedicated and passionate about your football. You travel all over France, you travel all over Europe together, and you're right. You know, it's not just about the football stadiums, it's about the transport infrastructure and everything in between. It's about on match days when they cordon off those big perimeter areas and expect us to walk maybe even up to 2 kilometres from our car to the stadium. They don't consider how do you do that as a person with limited mobility that doesn't use a wheelchair. But if you are going to be able to do what you do so well, ensuring that you're helping disabled people to come with you to those matches, we also have to respect that there are some disabled people who prefer to go individually. They prefer to sit somewhere else. They prefer to sit with their family or their friends. Some of us like to sit in groups of disabled people. Others, I'll be honest, me included, I prefer to be much more integrated. I want to get my tea and coffee or my beer or whatever at half-time with all of the other fans. I want to have a dialogue with all of my other fans. I don't want to be segregated only with disabled fans, as special as they are. And if we're ever going to change this landscape, we have got to make sure that everybody is inclusive. And while we're away in separate sections, separate lounges and so on, then the rest of the world doesn't see us, we're not visible. And the most powerful example of this was when we had the Europa Cup final in Romania. Now, we all know the stories that have come out of Romania in the last year, some really terrible, sad stories. You know, a country with a reputation where disabled people at birth were put into homes, and then we've seen the documentaries. The pride in that country, because UEFA led from the front, ensured that that final, that the host stadium was accessible. And we didn't realise until local NGOs told us that was the biggest gathering in a public place ever in Romania of disabled people. But the most powerful thing is that disabled people were sat amongst their peers all around the stadium. And the impact that it had, far wider than football, led to us being asked to speak on Romanian national television as part of the celebration of the International Day of Disabled People to tell that story. So we must never forget that bigger inclusion is very important. So I really respect the work you do, but this role has to be about a club person. I take your idea of having somebody that would have the responsibility as a disability access officer for the whole of Europe, but I think it would be an impossible job. You know, how many thousand clubs are there in the... You could never do it. There would never be enough hours in the day.
Okay, thank you, Joyce. There was another question just here, and David, and then my colleague here.
Hi, Karen Airwhite, UK Sports Ground Safety Authority. We write UK guidance on accessible provision at sports stadia. My question is really for Alun, as a sort of a kind of practical example from his day-to-day work. It strikes me that a really important part of this role is being able to find a way forward that works for disabled fans and for the club. And I'm just interested in whether you've got an example to share which shows how you've navigated some of that to make sure that it works for both parties.
Try and make sure that everything we do as a club includes disabled people in that process. So if the club is opening any new facility or service, my job is to ensure that is accessible to all fans, including those with disabilities.
David.
Could I just say, probably, Alun, I'm sure you'll agree with me that while things might be very good for you at Arsenal, quite often it's when you travel away that you have the frustrations because the other clubs don't match the quality and the numbers that you have at your own club. And I think that's an important point, that as and when your own club does make better provision for disabled people, their expectations rise, and then they want to travel to more away games. And sadly, we found in the UK particularly, there is a great disparity between different clubs within the league. So we're level playing field. That's what we want. That's what our name is, and that's what we want everybody to have that easy access to the facilities. Sorry, David.
David hasn't.
Sorry. My name's David Davis. I was in the senior role at the Football Association in England for 13 years and worked with a number of people in this room at UEFA and FIFA as well. My generation failed to address this issue properly. And I congratulate Joyce and everybody in this room for addressing it properly. It is, in my view, disgraceful that we are still in this generation discussing this issue. And I hope that this is the second such conference. I hope you have a few more, but not too many more, because I hope it will not be an issue for the next generation. The one thing I've learned, and it has been something of a crash course for me, is that if you have the champion that Joyce has talked about, if you have the champion in your club, in your country, that champion needs to be, if possible, at a senior level. That person, ideally at the very top level, who gets this issue and says, I am not going to tolerate this in my club any longer. That's my little statement. My question, and I hesitate to ask this with somebody from Arsenal, a distinguished person, a guest from Arsenal. Our friend from Marseille talked about costs and the cost of going to matches. How much of a deterrent is the cost of going to matches for disabled people, do you think, at this stage?
Obviously it is a deterrent. Personally, I would like to see lower ticket prices, but it's not something that I can influence on my own. It needs our supporters, the supporters of other teams, to make the case to try and persuade the Premier League and others to reduce prices. Having said that, I am in the fortunate position that Arsenal do charge their disabled supporters, home supporters and away supporters, half price for their ticket rather than a full price. So they do get some concession at the club. But generally, I think it could deter other people going from other clubs. And it's something that the Premier League and the other leagues should look at.
Yeah, if I can add, René made a really important point. It's not just the cost of the match ticket, it's how much day to day it costs to be a disabled person. And I think this is something that general Joe public often don't appreciate. It is everything from the cost of wheelchairs, the cost of other mobility aids, the cost of all sorts of things. But it's very often that you cannot use the same public transport, away coaches that other fans take for granted. So many football fans will travel, those in countries where it's very common to travel to away matches, they travel together on the coach. It's a much lower fare because it's collectively done. Often the club either lays the coach on or it subsidises the cost of the coaches to encourage fans to go. In many cases, those coaches are not accessible, backed up by either poor infrastructure or non-existent transport that's accessible in many countries. And so what we found is, like in Marseille, the Disabled Supporters Group, and there are others in Poland around the UK, where disabled fans come together, they raise money to buy their own minibuses so that they can go together to try and save costs. So it's not just the match ticket, it's the huge cost financially, but logistically. And I'll give you an example. If, as a football fan, you want to follow your club in Europe, as a wheelchair user or somebody else that requires assistance at the airport, when you book a flight that has a connecting flight, very often you probably don't even notice there may be only 40 minutes or an hour between connections. For disabled people, that often leads to you missing your connection. And actually, airlines advise that you allow at least 2 hours between connecting flights. Below that, they cannot guarantee that they will give you the passenger assistance needed to take you on and off the planes. So as an example, when we were working in Ukraine with our dear partners that were here from the National Assembly of Disabled People of Ukraine, it would take almost 24 hours to travel to meet them. We would travel to Germany as the stop-off point. This is when I lived up in the northwest. So I was travelling either from Liverpool or Manchester into somewhere into to Western Europe, usually Germany or another airport. And we would have to allow at least that 2 hours, and that would often actually lead to a 6-hour gap between those planes. So it would take us that length of time. Now imagine if you are taking a few days off work to go to a football match. That's your problem before you even start anything else. So you arrive, you've had a much more challenging journey than everyone else. And I think day to day, I see so many people nodding their heads in the room. Those are the challenges that we face, so those are the other bits that clubs could really help us with. Lots of different ways. The cost involved, you know, it just goes on and on. Finding accessible accommodation if you're away in Europe visiting a match. Often you have to stay in a higher grade hotel to guarantee being able to have an accessible, disabled-friendly hotel room, an added cost. People do not realise the hidden cost of being a disabled person. So it's a very important question. Thank you, David.
Okay, so I think we're into our final 2 or 3 questions. We've got one in the middle, then my colleague from Germany, and then a question there. We may take them all as one. Please, yeah.
Oui, Diane Cabois, Fédération française des 10, association nationale regroupant des familles et des personnes présentant des troubles des apprentissages. Et je suis membre du collectif pour une France accessible. Je voulais aller dans le sens de Joyce. Si le but est que les personnes qui ne sont jamais allées à un spectacle puissent aller au football, alors elles ne vont pas penser tout de suite à passer par un club de supporters. Quelqu'un qui n'est pas en situation de handicap, si elle veut aller au foot, elle ne passera pas par un club de supporters. Donc il me semble très important que la responsabilité de l'accès au spectacle soit de la responsabilité du club et pas d'associations autres. Voilà, je voulais juste aller dans ce sens.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question here from a colleague in Germany. He's going to use sign language, so we're just working out. I think you want to go in front of the camera. Okay, so he will take over the sign interpreter's place in the camera, and we'll have a colleague who translates for the rest of us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oleg, and I'm from Germany, from the Deaf Association, where we have 600. The German football sports club, and the
for European Championship, Champions Leagues, European League matches, we see that there's a lot of attention paid to access for wheelchair users, for blind people, partially sighted people. And as deaf people, we're really totally ignored. And we have our own barriers we're facing in terms of communication, in terms of access to information. So for the next European Championship in France, when we enter the stadiums, when I checked out the accessibility, I saw that things were arranged for wheelchair users and blind people. And do you want us deaf people to attend the European 2016 Championship? If yes, then special attention needs to be paid to us. Deaf people actually do like to sit together. We love meeting deaf people and deaf supporters from other countries. So I would argue not for access for individual deaf people sitting throughout the stadium. No, we do want to sit together collectively so we can enjoy the match, discuss the match together. That's one point I'd like to make, and I'll come back with further points later on. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for asking it in the way that you did. I've got a final question, and then I think I'll get the panel to respond to these 3 questions. Final question just there in the middle. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Keith Ferguson. I'm one of a few people here representing the National Disabled Association in Scotland, which has been on the go for 4 years. I would like to say actually that it would never evolved and been there without the support of CAFE, and that was one, and thank them for being there at the very beginning. One of the points somebody raised earlier about the DAO was what's that job all about, and the question I have for CAFE is, you had an earlier slide where there was a summary of the job description. And I think that's a very good starting point. And then people can then look at each line and then go below that to get the detail. And I was wondering if maybe in the near future, CAFE would have a job description, a generic job description that might be available, and if there was any timetable. That was the first question. Second question on the DAO, and it's been mentioned before, from a negative point of view, I'm aware of someone in Scotland who has an SLO job and a DAO job, and is also involved in the tickets, and they're finding it very hard to juggle. And I think that it's imperative that we try and keep it to two people, even if it's two part-time people rather than one full-time person, to ensure the focus. And last, on a positive thing, I've just been appointed a DAO for my own club, and they've embraced the whole idea from the very beginning of full access to the stadium. The chairman of the club supports it. I've been given full empowerment to deal with the security people, the stewards, and all the club employees in the ticket office. And if you get that from the very beginning, then you're away, and the role will be very, very successful. So if a club embraces it from the top, you will get the DAO role will be very, very successful. And I'm quite proud of our club for embracing it.
Thank you for that. So I think we've got some comments and questions, and we've probably got a minute and a half to answer them, and at the same time to wrap up your final comments. So Joyce, if we start with you, Ruth, and then Alan.
Yeah, okay. The really good news for Euro 2016 and for the services and provisions and welcome for deaf and hard of hearing fans is that it is very much part of our implementation plan. There are actually tickets that are called easy access seat tickets that are also there for deaf and hard of hearing fans that do want to sit in dedicated areas. So if you haven't already, when the sales go to the national associations, make sure you apply for those tickets because they are there. We are visiting each of the stadia and looking at things such as visual alarms, information being available on the screens in text, in caption format, and other provisions. For every topic of disability and access, we are on a journey, but I promise you this is very much on the agenda. We haven't forgot you, I give you my word. So please be aware of that. And as before, we completely respect that some disabled people like to travel together, like to be together, but we mustn't forget those that travel with a family. There are people here that travel with family members that are non-disabled. We have lots of horror stories where clubs are sitting disabled parents in one section and the children they're asking to sit in a completely different stand. So that's got to stop. So hence we need to do a bit of everything. But I give you my word, we are integrating your topic, and I'm just delighted you're at this event. I think one of you is joining the panel session at the end of the day as well, which is great. And then very briefly, I just wanted to talk about the job description and the implementation. As we discussed at the advisory group yesterday, CAFE's a little bit in catch-up on this. We sort of had two choices, either delay the criterion for another season, which we didn't want to do for obvious reasons, or CAFE would be a bit slow in catching up. But as soon as we get back, we'll begin the recruitment program, and as soon as that person is on board. But what we don't want to do is start to release a lot of information and then we can't support that, because that wouldn't be fair on everyone. So we are a little bit in catch-up. If we've got job descriptions internally, we can happily send to you, but it will take a little bit of a while. And you know, it's Scotland and your club, you're quite a way further down the journey, but in other countries we've got to give them time to get up to speed. So I hope that answers that bit.
Thanks, Joyce. Ruth.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on what the gentleman was saying about some of the groups of deaf people who prefer to sit together. I think that reflects how flexible the clubs need to be. I've always considered that as a deaf person, you would like to integrate with the rest of the crowd. But now I've learnt today that sometimes people prefer to be in groups with other deaf people. And I think it's really important that the clubs are flexible, and that the disability access officer is going to be the person that can champion that and be the good point of contact to make sure that there is a solution for everybody that suits everyone. I'd just like to pick up on the point that you made from Scotland. Absolutely right that the chief executive, if he buys into it, it makes a big difference. We've seen that particularly at level playing field with some of the lower league clubs in the last season or so. And absolutely, it's making a huge difference because it makes that disability access officer's job so much easier to be able to go there. And if it is something that involves some expenditure, that they will consider it and make a difference. And absolutely right. That's why it's so important to have that persuasion and that ability.
Thank you. Alan, it sounds like you will now have a lot more compatriots, colleagues at other clubs, Dinamo Zagreb, when you go there, Olympiacos, clubs where perhaps until now there hasn't been anybody for you to liaise with in the way that you want to.
I think it's really exciting that the whole UEFA licensing thing is going to put hopefully more disabled people, more DAOs in place. And I think it will hopefully result in a big leap forward. I'm looking forward to working with many more colleagues, both in the UK and in Europe, to move things forward.
Great. I think the message from this panel is that this is an opportunity. It's a new scheme. It's a great way now of taking forward our collective agenda. Let's try and take this on in the coming year or two. And I hope everybody sees the opportunity and the way in which we can really begin to make a difference for the lives of disabled people. I want to thank my panel. Let's have a round of applause, please. Thank you. I think it's fair to say during this panel we've sort of warmed you up as an audience, so we've got some great sessions to come, I'm sure, with some big issues being discussed. We're now going for a coffee break, and the coffee break, we now have about 20-25 minutes, so please be back in 20 minutes exactly at your seats, and we can start the next session on time. Thank you very much.